Dear First Lady and President Obama, dear Michelle and Barack, I appeal to you as parents. Can you imagine Malia at the age of 7 and Sasha at age 4 being taken from you by the federal government, against your wishes, by law, to a boarding school far from your home? They'd be forbidden to speak English, their hair cut off, doused with DDT powder, their mouths washed out with lye if they spoke their own language. They'd be separated from each other, intentionally kept apart. They'd be given foreign-sounding names, put in uniforms, and held to a rigid military school regiment with no parental love. They'd be forced to practice a religion that told them they had sinned and were savages. There was also the chance for them to suffer physical and sexual abuse. And also possible that they would not come home in the summer, hired out to work on local farms, and also possible that they would not even be returned to your community until they were 18, not knowing their language, understanding their culture, or being bonded with you or any other parent figure. This is what happened to many generations of Native peoples in this country. The peak of the boarding school era was in the 1970s. In the 50s, this practice began to morph into policies of adoption and foster care that created the same results: parents losing their children, children losing their parents and culture. This practice of high levels of adoption and foster care actually continue today. I'm sure you can imagine the devastation to your girls, but also imagine how it would break your hearts, as well as your community, if nearly all the children were taken, for generation after generation. The taking of Native children is just one of the many violations to indigenous people in this territory we call the United States. There's a shameful history that most non-Native people don't know, a history of consistent policies, laws, and actions to decimate Native people since very first contact 500 years ago. I'm asking you, President Obama, before you leave office, to educate the American people to the truth of this history, and in that context of owning our past, to be the first president to apologize to all the indigenous peoples of this land. For healing to begin, Native people deeply deserve an apology, but not one that is given without the full disclosure of what we are apologizing for. I'm asking you to deliver one of your historic speeches, like the one in Selma, to the entire country so everyone can witness the truth and hear the amends. This apology would name the truth, begin the healing, and educate Americans about so much of what isn't known or taught or has been intentionally minimized and swept under the rug. Most Americans do not know this history we share with Native peoples. As a nation, we are out of integrity with who we say we are and what we stand for, with this going unnamed. By not acknowledging our history and apologizing to those we hurt and continue to hurt, we are showing our children and the rest of the world a level of hypocrisy that is impossible to justify. Did you know there was a bounty on the heads of Penobscot Indians called the Spencer Phipps Proclamation in 1755? In the territory of Massachusetts and Maine? For killing and scalping an Indian, you got 50 pounds for a man, which was a year's salary at the time for clergy. And there was a lesser amount for women and even an amount for children under the age of 12. And bounties existed all over the United States. How outrageous that our nation's capital football team uses the word redskin, which refers to this scalping practice. There is a deep wound in this country, a wound that we need to begin healing. And it's foundational. It resides in the very ground we walk on and occupy, in the air that we breathe. It is no longer acceptable for this information to be hidden and unknown, Mr. President. You have been better than any president before you in recognition of the 565 tribes, creating the White House Council on Native American Affairs and the White House Tribal Nations Conference. But without this entire country understanding our shared history, things cannot fully improve. Native people remain the most socioeconomically distressed group by far than any other in this country. Their statistics bear out the legacy of what has been perpetrated on them. Non-Native people would like to think that their conditions are because of who they are, but it is because of what has happened to them from the start. You can't heal what you don't name. In Maine, we're the first state in the country to create a Truth and Reconciliation Commission about what happened to Native children. It is the Maine Wabanaki State Child Welfare Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I worked in support of that commission, educating non-Native people about this history for 3.5 years. The healing has begun in Maine. As a white Euro-American woman, I'm asking for this apology, but only if it is given in the context of owning what happened, teaching American people about the doctrine of discovery, the many trails of tears, the Dawes Act, Manifest Destiny, Sand Creek, Wounded Knee. Did you know that Native people did not get the right to vote until 1954, and yet they served in disproportionately high numbers in every military conflict, even helping us win World War II as the Code Talkers? Wasn't this country founded on religious freedom, and yet we outlawed Native American spirituality for nearly 100 years, until 1978? And there is so much more to acknowledge. Mr. President, do not be afraid to make this apology. The floodgates it will open will be the hearts and minds of both non-Native and Native people alike. The descendants of the perpetrators need healing too. An apology with ownership of what happened will go a long way to begin this healing and create change for our country. It is what is just. It is a moral and spiritual issue. Indigenous people deserve this. It is the least we can do, and it is a beginning. Please make this one of your outstanding legacies. The healing has begun in Maine, and it can travel across this country when we all know the truth. The time has come to do this, Mr. President, and I beseech you. My name is Arla Patch, and thank you for listening.